So with that in mind, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of H.R. 1191, the Iran sanctions bill, that I be allowed to modify my amendment number 1186 with the changes that are at the desk.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, as the Senator Vitter has pointed out, right now we're on the motion to proceed to the trade bill. We're not on the Iran sanction bill. And there are continuing discussions taking place on the Iran sanctions bill between Senator Corker and myself in an effort to try to get as many of the amendments that we've been working on cleared as possible. And Senator Vitter's request could very well at this point interfere with the maximum number of amendments being considered. And for that reason, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, my request isn't going to interfere with anything. That's a bunch of bull. My request is that I be allowed to modify the language of my own amendment, which is pending, and it's not going to interfere with any other amendment. Now, let's be upfront about what's going on here. It's not an open amendment process. We've been talking about this bill for 2 weeks, and we've had 2 votes on amendments. And they're not even talking about amendment votes. What Senator Cardin is describing is negotiating the language and changing the language of certain amendments so it is agreeable to everyone, including him. That's not an open amendment process. Those aren't votes. That's not voting up and down. That's not giving everyone their say and everyone their ability to have votes. That is blocking the gate, blocking the door, returning to the practices of the Harry Reid Senate, and then holding everybody hostage and demanding the language you want, Senator Cardin wants, everybody wants, in order for that amendment to even possibly be considered. That's as far from an open amendment process as you can get. So if that's what they're discussing, they might as well stop now, because I'm going to object. I want a vote on my amendment. I want votes on other significant amendments. And if this is just a game to come to some unanimous consent agreement, some manager's package, which they bless, they can stop those discussions right now, because I'm going to object. So again, Mr. President, I think it's reasonable that a senator get to modify his own amendment. I think that's a pretty minimal request. And so I'm going to repeat it. I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of H.R. 1191, that I be allowed to modify amendment number 1186 with the changes that are at the desk.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. Mr. President, let me point out, but for the fact that Senator Cardin filed an amendment, and he had every right to do so, I'm not saying he did not, without Senator Corker or I or the leadership knowing that he was going to go to that process, Senator Vitter could have modified his amendment. He's being blocked and needs consent because of actions taken by a Republican senator. Prior to that action being taken, Senator Corker and I, working with, I think there were somewhere around 60 amendments filed by Republicans, none by Democrats, I might say, a bill that passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee 19-0, excuse me. One that incorporated many amendments of the members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, including the presiding officer, which was working with us on this. We worked those out. And we are in the process of presenting to the floor an additional 4 amendments for floor action. When that action was taken by a senator who had every right to do it, who was trying to get his amendment considered on the floor, which in effect blocked other amendments from being considered on the floor. When you have one party following all the amendments, it's necessary to have an orderly process for these considerations. We were in the process of doing that, and that was blocked. And Senator Corker and I regret that we did not have a chance to bring more amendments in an orderly way for consideration on the floor. But what the request of Senator Vitter is to try to get his amendment in a different position than other amendments, And for that reason, I object.
Mr.
Objection is
President,
heard. Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, this isn't being blocked by Senator Cardin. Everybody knows that. Senator Cardin has made clear he would happily agree to getting amendments up to be voted. He's made that perfectly clear. This has been a determined, choreographed effort to close the door at an open amendment process and to demand leverage so that every amendment has to be worked out. You know what worked out means? That means they get a veto, we don't get a vote. That's unreasonable, and that's the exact opposite of an open amendment process. I'm not being blocked by Senator Cardin. I know that. Everybody knows that. We're being blocked by the managers of this bill. I think it's highly, highly regrettable. And as I said, if the end game here is to work out amendments to Senator Cardin or anyone else's satisfaction, and they get a veto, they can stop their work on that right now, because I am objecting. I will object. I want a vote. Thank you.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, let me just point out, in response to Senator Vitter, we've had 2 record votes on the floor on this bill. Both were amendments that were overwhelmingly rejected. They're not amendments that I wanted on the bill. I opposed both of those amendments. Senator Corker opposed both of those amendments. When the amendment was offered by Senator Cardin, we are in the process of scheduling another vote on the floor of an amendment that I equally opposed. And several of the other amendments that members have tried to make pending, I've indicated I will oppose them. I did not object to votes on those amendments, and so I just want to respond to Senator Vitter. Senator Corker and I did not attempt to block votes on amendments that we don't agree with. We were seeking an orderly way to proceed because, quite frankly, this bill is critically important to our country. Let's not lose sight of what we're trying to achieve, and that is to block Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And the best way for us to do this is for this body and the House and the President to speak with united voice, to give us the strongest possible position in negotiations, and for Congress to carry out its responsibility to review this agreement, because it was Congress that imposed the sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table. And we have a responsibility in an orderly way to review that agreement. The legislation that we've brought forward, that the presiding officer was very helpful in bringing forward, allows us in an orderly way to consider that agreement if one is reached, so that we can have open hearings in a deliberative way to determine how Congress should act. And that's what this bill does. And I regret that my friend from Louisiana, and he is my friend, feels that any amendment he wants to offer, and there's 60-some other amendments to be offered, that he should be able to bring them up at any time he wants to. Quite frankly, this bill is too important for us to use anything but an orderly way for the consideration of amendments. That's what this bill does for the consideration of a potential agreement. And I thank Senator Corker for his leadership, and the 2 of us are going to work together to make sure that we complete this bill in an orderly way. With that, I yield the floor.